Yeah. Get the mic already? Yeah. We had a good turnout.
Good.
Yeah. There were about 15 people. About 10 of them were all new. It was really good.
You're talking about Wednesday night? Or Wednesday. And I was thinking about the power lunch too. Just now.
Yeah. So I think we'll set a lunch for next week, Friday, and I'll go ahead and announce that. Is that going to work for you?
Yeah, let's do that.
And then if anyone wants to stay after class today, they can ask you questions.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't kind of stop listening.
Hello.
Alright, let's go ahead and start class. Hope you guys are all excited for the weekend. We have 3 handouts. I assume most of you have picked it up. If you haven't, it's in the back and also at the front here. As you're aware, your papers for Tuesdays with Maury are due today. If you haven't already, please, after class, come down and drop your paper off right here. We'll be collecting and grading those. Just a heads up, the next assignment due is The Millionaire Next Door. Read that, and same kind of assignment, 10 quotes and your reasoning behind picking them. It's a bit heavier read than Tuesdays with Maury, so we encourage you to start soon putting that together. Couple other announcements. We sent out an email about changing the world over lunch. We were just meeting over the blue line. Thanks to those of you that were able to make it. I think we had a really great discussion about some ways to make a difference. Also, thanks to those that are able to attend the club. Really great meeting. Really excited about the things we talked about. Again, we'll be meeting Wednesday, 2:20 in the Tanner. Feel free to come and bring any friends that may be interested. Am I forgetting anything else? And last announcement, next week, just to be able to spend a bit more time with Craig, and I believe we're having a guest speaker as well.
No.
It's just you? Okay, it's going to be Craig, and we're going to have a little activity. It's going to be a brown bag lunch. After class, I think we usually have this class for a bit. Feel free to bring a sack lunch or something from the blue line. We're just going to kind of sit around, eat our lunches, and talk with Craig. He'll answer any questions that you might have. And after class today, for a brief period, if anyone has questions, I think we'll just gather around here and talk a bit about what Craig's going to go over today. The reason for this is today and then next week, it's going to be a bit more on the financial aspect, so you may have questions. And then the club meeting on Wednesday will be directly related to today's lesson, dealing with simple living and a measure pleasure activity that Craig's going to go over. Okay, with that said, Brad is going to give our opening prayer, and we'll turn the time over to Craig.
Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for our stay. We thank you for the chance that we have to come and learn how we can obtain more happiness in our lives and in our careers. Please bless us how to continue to study hard and do well on our exams, our quizzes, and how to remember all that we just studied. We thank you so much for the gospel, for the prophets, and the priesthood. Please bless us always to follow the commands of thy Spirit. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Brad. We had one, this is, after all, an entrepreneurship class, and we had one bold venture starting out of the box right now. You just want to explain it for 20 seconds, good brother, and then we'll move.
All right. Well, like you said, in lieu of the entrepreneurial spirit of our class, and just to help ends meet, my wife has come up with a box of cupcakes. They're little mini cupcakes that she's selling for Valentine's Day, perfect for home teaching families or that special someone. And I'm going to pass around a flyer. $1 from each of your perfect purchases 10 cupcakes in a box will go to St. Jude's Hospital, charity that means most to my wife. So I will pass around. There's a picture of what it is. If you could just sign up and leave it up at the top, we'll deliver those next week if you're interested. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. If there's more businesses that start up in the next few weeks, come let me know. We'll discuss them maybe a little bit. Tuesdays with Maury. Give me a hand if you liked it. Wow, is it almost universal? Give me a hand if you couldn't stand it. Well, nobody could. Okay, are you sure? I mean, usually there's a little bit more discussion about it. I just picked out of the blue somebody's paper, and just to give you an example of what you may have written, this is one that finished in my top 10, found on page 126. You know what really gives you satisfaction? Offering others what you have to give. This person goes on to say, this I feel is exactly in line with the Savior's words when he said, when you find your life, you'll lose it. There's such a huge range of emotions that accompany giving of your time and means, all of which are fulfilling and rewarding, etc., etc. One more, page 157. But here's the secret. In between, we need others as well. Again, there were so many profound, I think, comments from Tuesdays with Maury. I appreciate it because it moves us into the meaningful category, I believe, of life, and in contrast it with more of a rat race existence. If Maury were here, this is kind of the last piece. We're going to move not from meaning to non-meaning. We're just going to move from meaning to something practical that allows more meaning. But before we do that, if Maury were here, I think he'd really appreciate this video clip. Some of you, again, may have seen it. To me, it's sort of the answer, again, like the special needs group, of going back, reaching down, picking up, where real enduring happiness can be found. This, again, happened in my home state of Washington. I know a good brother from Cedar Woolley here. High five on that one. It happened on the east side, in a little town called Ellensburg, and it happened at a women's softball game. And it's called Touching All the Bases. So I'll go ahead and play that right now. This is my ode to Maury, and hopefully everybody here.
In Washington State, on a field inside a chain-link fence, in a game fewer than 100 people saw.
Probably turn some lights
A
on.
home run memorable not for the distance it traveled, or the game it decided, but for the meaning it carried. The last Saturday in April, the second game of a softball doubleheader between Central Washington and Western Oregon.
Well, we were both making it fighting for the conference championship.
As a senior, this was Sarah Tucholsky's last chance to win a championship. She'd never hit a home run before, not in college, and not in her life.
I try to not very tall. I'm more at line driver and I don't hit the foul.
But at the top of the second inning, with 2 runners on the second pitch, that changed.
And we're just cheering, and the runners are cheering as they round the base to head home. And then I'm going, where's Sarah?
In her excitement, Tucholsky failed to touch first base, so she quickly turned back.
Her head like just didn't pivot with her. And I heard her kind of yell, and she just dropped to the ground, and I was like, oh no.
Just fell immediately and was in a lot of pain. Just, you know, I tried to keep my legs straight, but I was in so much pain that I couldn't really keep still.
Tucholsky, with a torn ACL, crawled back to first base. She was a long way from reaching home plate and hitting her first and only home run.
When she got back to first base, she laid there and she hung on to first base, and then at that time I was staring at the base and I go, what on earth are we going to do?
And I turned to the umpire standing right next to me. I said, what is the ruling if I put something in for Sarah? He said, it'll be a 2-run single.
If anybody would have, on her team would have helped Sarah, she would have been called out.
That was the problem. None of Tucholsky's teammates were allowed to touch her. That's That's when Central Washington's Mallory Holtman, a player with more home runs than any other in conference history, a player to the opposing team, spoke up.
I went to the home plate umpire and asked if we could pick her up and carry her, and he looked at me a little strange.
When the umpire went and said, yes, you can do that, I'm still standing there in shock. I said, thank you so much.
We asked her, like, is it okay if you have me carry you around the bases? And I said yes, and and say thank you. And she says, you hit the ball over the fence, you deserve it.
For that reason only, because she deserved it, Holden and Wallace began to carry the injured Tucholsky, stopping to touch her left foot on each base as the three made their way around the diamond.
We actually started laughing because we were just wondering what this would look like to all the people in the stand.
When I looked up, I didn't see, giant smiles and screams. I saw emotion and tears and people crying.
It's a great moment when someone has character to step up and do the right thing at the right time.
It's more sure.
You're proud. You're associated with those kids. That's a quick home run defeated for number 8, Sarah Tucholsky.
We pop the lights on again. Great. That's it. No. So everything that we talk about now going forward, really relates back to this. So I don't want to get caught in wealth and numbers and not remember that the purpose of why one would consider building a little bit of residual wealth. Not to build one's own fiefdom, because remember, there's no real joy there or happiness, at least long-term or enduring. If you're able to build it for this kind of purpose, to take the best of what you have to change the world in whatever way it would be, then you'll break beyond, this earthly existence almost and feel like you're in heaven. And that's really what this is all about. Now, one end of the spectrum, Tuesdays with Maury. The other end of the spectrum, The Millionaire Next Door, which was actually written in at least published in 1996. So we're 12, 13 years removed. I think it holds as true today as it did then, and one of those principal books that just makes sense. There were two professors from Illinois that decided to do a case-based study on millionaires. And the very first part of the book reads this, and I think this is why it was so surprising. This is what makes it a great paradox, and this is what we're going to talk about for the next couple of weeks. 20 years ago, we began studying how people become wealthy. Initially, we did it just as you might imagine by surveying people in so-called upscale neighborhoods across the country. In time, we discovered something odd. Many people who live in expensive homes and drive luxury cars do not actually have much wealth. Then, we discovered something even odder. Many people who have a great deal of wealth do not even live in upscale neighborhoods. What is so profound about these discoveries? Just this. Most people have it all wrong about wealth in America. Wealth is not the same as income. If you make a good income each year and spend it all, you're not getting any wealthier. You're just living high. Wealth is what you accumulate, not what you spend. ... Those are both on page 1. This is going to page 7. These people cannot be millionaires. They don't look like millionaires. They don't dress like millionaires. They don't eat like millionaires. They don't act like millionaires. They don't even have millionaire names. Where are the millionaires who look like millionaires? His view of millionaires is shared by most people who are not wealthy. They think millionaires own expensive clothes, watches, and other status artifacts. We have found this is not the case. My son got this in a cereal box. This is my watch. Anyway, I get, I email quite a bit back and forth. People that know I'm doing this send things either to try to contradict maybe or to verify. This is from a brother-in-law. He's 3 years removed from the University of Chicago Law School. He's at a firm now, fairly good-sized law firm in Chicago. And this is what he wrote me yesterday on the internet. And this is kind of what we find in reality. Keep in mind that lawyers are at least initially the highest paid graduates in America of any college. And this is what he said. Again, he's 3 years into a firm in Chicago. I just read an interesting article in ABA magazine I get at work that I never read. Talked about lawyers who'd taken time off or who'd retired early. One guy at 48 years old just decided he didn't want to work in the law anymore, so he just quit. He still had kids at home. He spent a couple of years just hanging out with his family. I'm not sure I recommend that, but this is what this story was about. He eventually was presented with an offer to go back to another firm, and he did because he enjoyed it. But his whole point was that because he lived within his means, when he was burnt out, he could afford to just quit. That was his main advice. Saving money hedges against the paranoia of losing your job because you know that if you do lose your job, everything will be okay. And saving allows you to explore other options if you get tired. Perhaps his most telling comment was when he said most of his peers were living paycheck to paycheck. That's mid-40s to 50s lawyers making plenty of money living paycheck to paycheck. I know the same is probably true here, meaning his own firm. I've spoken with junior and mid-level partners in their late 30s, early 40s here who are probably bringing in between $300,000 and $500,000. At bigger firms, they're making more. And they're living paycheck to paycheck. Sounds awful, was his comment. Then at the bottom he puts, no surprises here. Just crazy to think of living from paycheck to paycheck when I'm 45. I replied saying, easy credit and needing to show others that you're winning the race and thinking the good life equals stuff and exotic trips leads to a large majority of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. And you know what? Other than the Amish, there is no subculture of Americana once they've become Americanized that seems to overcome the gravitational pull to indebtedness. That doesn't mean individuals can slip through and do something different. But you don't really see large groups, whether they be LDS, Catholic, lawyers, doctors, it doesn't really matter. You don't see a large group of people that are really living in the way that we're about ready to work through right now. Let me just start by saying something personal. I grew up in a small town north of Seattle, about 60 miles. It's called Burlington. It's mostly full of, used to be anyway, full of farmers. And the farming community is a little bit different than the city community. I remember in high school there were some city folks from Seattle that drove up in cars that were pretty nice. I didn't know much about cars and didn't really care, but they started calling names using certain body parts as they yelled out to these city guys. And I'm like, well, what's the deal? And in the end, the thought was basically big hat, no cattle, which also comes across in Millionaire Next Door, which is, for whatever reason, a lot of folks in the city feel like they need to prove something, and they do it usually through material items. It doesn't happen as much in the country, or at least around farmers. So I kind of grew up that way. But beyond that, there was a couple strange things that happened. I remember at 13 years old, I'd only cried so far up to that point because I got hurt over time. But then I heard a song on the radio. I think we were still listening to AM back then. FM hadn't really pulled through, so it was a little scratchy. But I remember being completely moved and starting to weep at 13 listening to this song. And I actually got a little video cut of it, so I'll play just a few seconds of it, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what I heard and thought. It was sort of life-changing for me.
I was talking about this thing. A child who arrived just the other day. He came to the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away, and he was talking for a doing, and as he grew, he said, I'm gonna be like you, Dad. You know I'm gonna be like you. And the cat silk cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, Dad, don't know when, but we'll get together then. We're gonna have a good time then. My son turned 10 just the other day. He said, thanks for the ball, and come on, let's play. Can you teach me to throw? I said, not today, I got a lot to do. He said, that's okay. And then he walked away, but his smile never dipped his head. I'm gonna be like him, yeah. You know I'm gonna be like him. And the cats in the cradle and the silver spoon, the little boy blue, the man on the moon. When you're coming home, Dad, I don't know when, we'll get together then. We're gonna have a good time then.
Okay, with the lights. That song still haunts me today. Now, for me, everything sort of came together. My dad, by all accounts, is incredibly successful, and he owned a large business at the time, a grocery business of all things, was a stake president, and came from alcoholism. So I don't know, whatever, that combination made it so he had a hard time sharing feelings, and he wasn't around a lot. And for whatever, and I felt like I needed that. I'm not blaming anybody or anything, but I remember hearing that song and saying, no matter what, it's going to be different for my kids. And nothing else even came close to being as important as that from then on in my thinking. And so, hence some of the kids coming. And anyway, we talked about 10 things that are really 10 different ideas that maybe you can feel strongly about. One of them was promoting families. That's certainly huge for me. The second one happened when my mother's copy of a 1958 book from Henry David Thoreau fell into my lap. And it's called Walden, and the first chapter is a chapter called Economy. I didn't really have to go much beyond the first chapter because by the time I'd read the first chapter, I felt like I'd put it all together at that point. This is by the time I'm about 18 or 19. And here was, okay, I want to be the greatest dad ever. I want to be with them at least more than normal. But I'm not sure how that's going to be possible. And then reading that put it into place. Beyond that, by the way, something personal, I went to Alberta on a mission. It was in the early 80s. There was a recession at the time, especially in Canada, and some of the oil types of things, which was big in Alberta, fell. And I saw, plenty of people go through that, and a lot of challenging money issues. At the same time, I noticed a few people, at least you sensed from a middle-class sort of environment. You'd walk in, there was a lot of peace, there was a lampshade on, the scriptures were there, felt like just a total peace in the home. And to me, and I saw a lot of people that were supposedly wealthy really struggling, and for whatever reason, it all just made sense. This was going to be the way we were going to live if my wife, at some point in the future, believed it. And anyway, what happened was essentially that we decided not to get into any debt if at all possible. And what happened was I got married a little bit late. I don't recommend that either. I was 28. My wife was 20. I'd saved some up till then. She brought something in. And we had enough, just enough, to either buy outright a small home on a busy street, or it would have been a healthy down payment, up in the Cove, for instance. The Cove, if you're from Salt Lake, you kind of know. And we decided, unlike maybe most people, that we'd just pay cash outright for this small home on a busy street. And then from then on, at least in my mind, it would have been about $1,000 that we would be paying to the bank every month on mortgage payment that we weren't. And so we just decided to take that. Instead of taking it to the bank, we wouldn't bring it in. We just flush it back out another way and buy assets that were actually meant to increase or return money or both. And things like public stock or private stock in the company that I was working for, or land, or commercial building, or real estate in some other form or fashion, or a small bit of a little company owned by people that I knew or trusted. And then sort of some different things happened as well. When we would buy a car, we'd buy like a 3-year-old car, pay cash for it, and assume the same thing. So instead of the $300 a month going to pay the car for the car to some financial institution, again, that went in a different direction. And then sort of along with that, the company that I worked for was small, and they started growing, and I was able to get to buy a piece of the company, about 3% of it, fairly early on. And over the next 8 years or so, that grew about 4 times what it was initially. Anyway, the combination of all those things sort of happening together while still living very simply allowed for what was going on behind the balance sheet to really improve and increase. And at some point, I don't know if I remember showing you the point of choice where you live moderately, get out of debt, and if you're able to buy assets, the income from the assets can move at a faster rate than your moderate debt-free expenses. And because we sort of worked that way, it happened very quickly. Again, I'm not even sure that's the answer. I'm sure a couple of those principles are the answer. I'm not sure being that aggressive about it. But anyway, that's sort of what happened. And by the time we were about 35 or 36, we were getting closer and closer to the point of choice. And my father was called to be a mission president of a brand new mission in Ohio. It's called the Ohio Cincinnati Mission, 1998. And we had enough freedom at that point. We weren't at the point of choice yet, but we decided that we felt like he needed some help. He'd never been on a mission, never served, and wonderful leader, by the way, and a deep testimony. And we went with him to help for 2 years. And when we came back, we felt that we should go in a different direction, and that's another story for another day. But the train came in fast, again, handling money like that. On the outside, you never would have known. I can still remember how grateful I am for my neighbors when I left the job or the company I was working with. Everyone just assumed that we were in trouble. You know, they'd be calling, they'd leave stuff on the front door, and we just assured them that everything was okay, and from a financial basis at least. So that's a little bit of the personal story. In our heart of hearts, there were great things that we were feeling. Partly because we were living so darn joyfully the whole time that we were supposedly skimping. We were living in about half of our income and living very, very joyfully. We were debt-free right from the beginning, and so that's what made this thing go really fast. But the way that this happened, I think anyway, and one of the tools I would ask you to consider, and you're probably doing already now, but I find that as soon as people, for whatever reason, get out into the workforce, they maybe stop doing this. But I call it measure pleasure, and this is one of the handouts here. But on the front side, it's more of a quantitative analysis procedure you might get in MBA school. And that's sort of what we did. We didn't do it quite this. We didn't actually write it down quite like this. It was always going on in my head, and Carrie and I would discuss it quite a bit. But measure pleasure is just simply writing basically 4 columns down, as you see here. The first one is any pleasurable, enjoyable activity you can think of. You could probably come up with 100 in the course of an hour or two if you're really thinking out of the box and all the different things you might be able to do. The next box over, if you will, you might put to something like the level of satisfaction you would receive if you're married together with family more or just individually, that you might receive from doing whatever that is, from 1 to 10. The next box over is something that we don't consider maybe as much as we should if we care about financial independence at all, and that is what the approximate cost might be to do that. One of 4 categories is enough. Free for F, F for free, L for low, M for medium, and H for high. And then just simply the next box over, all you would do is highlight any activity that got 8 or higher on the satisfaction level and was either free or low cost on the next box over. I think from the handout here, things got a little bit askew, but anyway, if they were all in the same category, you'd see that a little bit more clearly. But then, we just simply at that point take things that were incredibly satisfying and mostly free or low cost, and do that most of the time. And do that most of the time. And we're still really, Claire will probably tell you, we're not done doing all the things that we'd considered. Some of the things that have made that list are on the back side, called high-value, low-cost activity examples. A lot of them have ended up being more involved with humanitarian things over the years. They didn't start that way as much as it should have. But that's ended up being incredibly meaningful, usually at low or no cost, again, which isn't quite as big an issue. But you can see a smattering of these things. Music night, a lot of these things were together quite a bit. Frisbee golf, we actually have a course not too far from our home. I'm a former golfer, but it's a little expensive, and we've kind of turned it over into Frisbee golf. Is that great? These are the kinds of things that you do now, but for whatever reason it seems like, because you might start off with a $50,000 salary, which by the way is only about $38,000 to you. That's another story for another day. We just consider that we can jump into all kinds of things that would turn out maybe that aren't really all that meaningful anyway, and rip the stuffing out of the balance sheet and income statement, and never allow you really to become free. So my feeling is, at least, you can see from this tool how at least it's possible to live simply, freely, joyfully while building the kinds of things going on in the background that could allow you to be more free down the road to really make a difference. Any questions about that at all? This is the kind of thing you might be talking about next Wednesday, it sounds like, in the Meaningful Life Club. This, by the way, doesn't mean that we would never go to Disney World or Disneyland. We've gone a few times. It's not something that we'd concentrate on. Obviously here it looks like it's a 10 on the satisfaction level, at least according to the kids, maybe even for me for a day or two. But the cost is high, and so that'd be something we maybe point to over a 5-year time horizon, or really save up for as a family, working on projects that would lead to that. We've actually become more of a mountain kind of outdoorsy, picnicky, family movie night at home, help neighborhood people that need our help sort of a family. And I think we're better off for it, personally. And I think if Carrie were here, which she might be at some point, she would speak to that as well. Okay. I wanted to make that point before we get to the tale of two families. By the time I'd sort of figured this out, I felt like I needed to say something to the public, and so we started with this little tale a few years ago. It certainly catches people's attention. I didn't make this up. It actually came from a man named John Communita, who put it in a different context. I just sort of took it out, changed a few things, and brought it more into an LDS-centric experience. Now, if I was teaching people outside the church, I wouldn't be this sort of upfront about principles coming from the Church of Jesus Christ. Some of you may not be a member of the church, so you get a little hint of what's going on within the church of some of the things that we talk about. And let's just read this. There's two sides to it. There's assumptions or mathematical assumptions on the back, and the tale is on the front. I'll stop and maybe move to the back, and we can work through it. Maybe take a hand if you have a question. Two young LDS families lived side by side. Each bought their homes on the same day for the same price. The husbands both graduated. I think does it say BYU on yours? Okay, it says the U of U here. Boy, sorry, I've been there before. On the same day, got the exact same job with the same pay, married twin sisters, have the same amount of kids, and their salaries remain the same exactly forever. Could you get more of the same than that? I try to make it as the same as possible. So not only now are they exact the same, the balance sheets, everything's exactly the same, but in the future, the salary remains the same between both fathers forever. Okay. For all practical purposes, they're financially identical. However, the October following their house purchases, family A goes to general conference. Here's the prophet remind us to get out of debt quickly, live below our means, save, and pay an honest tithe. That came up a couple weeks ago, didn't it? Those four. Hey, what happened? Did it just change? Those four things that we hear often from the brethren. It seemed to come up every time. They feel the Spirit, sense the need, and commit to following the Lord's plan of prosperity. Family B, though a very active LDS family, doesn't hear the message and continues living the American way, essentially buying things they don't need with money they don't have, charging it up, paying it down, and never separating income from expenses. Family A, in a family council following General Conference, realizes that a healthy portion of their take-home pay is blown by convenience, indulgence, and appearance purchases that only deprive them of enduring happiness. Here's what they decide. Number one, we'll go out to eat one special night per month instead of our norm of 4 or 5 times. Number two, we'll completely cut out fast food and convenience store indulgences. Number three, we'll be more careful about what we purchase at grocery stores. Number four, we'll get rid of cable TV. Number 5, we'll buy only clothing that we need. Number 6, we'll focus on low or no-cost pleasurable experiences over higher cost experiences, recognizing that we're gaining satisfaction in the process. That's exactly what we talked about, that measure pleasure paper. So those are the 6 things. You know, some of them are going to be a little challenging maybe initially, but you know, you'll get over it probably fairly soon and not even think about it in time. But essentially, those aren't huge issues. But what it does is this. Next paragraph. Because of these relatively small changes, they're able to carve out approximately 7.5% of their blown take-home pay of $400 per month. Now, following Elder Ashton's debt elimination calendar, I haven't pulled that out. It's called One for Your Money. That's one of the first things the church came out with. Not one of the first things, but something practical in the mid-'70s. On page 5, in One for the Money, they apply that accelerator margin, or that savings of $400, to the highest priority debt. We'll turn to the back here in a second. In this case, it was a car with $7,250 balance and a $491.08 minimal payment. By the way that you line up what's most important, at least according to John Commuta, is that you take the remaining balance, in this case $7,250, and divide it by the minimum payment, $491. The lowest answer becomes your highest priority. So you do that with each debt, and the lowest answer in that division becomes the highest priority. That's the first thing that you would pay off. I think he leans more towards cars than he does credit cards, even though the credit card payment might be with a higher interest, because you see things happen more quickly. And it becomes more of a, wow, this really is powerful stuff. Anyway, using this strategy, the car is paid off in 9 months. Then they take the $400 initial dollars, plus the $491 they're now getting back. Of course, it used to go off for the car payment, which is $891.08, and they pile it on top of the monthly payment for the next debt in line. In this case, it's another car. And they complete that debt in 8 months. Then they apply the continued snowballing amounts until they go through all the debts, including their house payment. Because of that power, at least in this case, all debts are paid off in 5.5 years, which blows people away. You can actually become completely debt-free in this case in 5.5 years. Now, that is pretty quick. Not everyone can get it done that fast. Most of you aren't in this kind of situation yet, so you can breathe a sigh of relief. But you probably would be if you're not careful very quickly. So let's just turn it over really fast and look at some of the assumptions that we've made here. 2, 4, 6, 8. There's 9 separate debts that this particular family has. Actually, both of them. Remember, one here's what the brethren say, decide to get out of as soon as possible. And so, in dividing the remaining balance with the monthly payment of each of these debts, car 2 comes up highest priority. If you do the divider, you'll find out, I think it's 13, 14, somewhere in there. Car 1's next, then the department store discovery, card, Visa, all the plastic coming through, then the home equity loan, and finally the mortgage payment. And literally, in this case, as you see here, the amount of time it took to complete all their debts because of the snowball effect was 72 months, but there's a little asterisk there, and if you look down at the asterisk, let's just read that. Though the final total shows 72 months, or 6 years to become completely debt-free, this family would actually have become debt-free 6 months sooner by applying leftover dollars from each of the debt's final payments to the next debt line, thus coming to the 5.5 years after General Conference figure. So, for instance, car number 2, that last payment might have been finished with about $15. And they would have had, in this case, quite a bit left over. And instead of applying that to the next debt in line that same month, they waited till the following month. And if you do that, then it'll take a little bit longer. So, anyway, that was the answer there. All of this is based on the accelerator margin of $400 they were able to apply immediately to the first debt, which was approximately 7.5% of their monthly take-home pay, at least at the beginning of the process. $400 became less significant as a percentage of their income as their salary and passive income increased over the years. The next thought down here, the origination of the above assumptions came from a man named John Commuta. Commuta has performed debt surgery on many people who are steeped in debt, and he says the majority of those people fall within a 5 to 7 year debt freedom payoff date. Where it doesn't work so quickly is when there are large mortgage payments as a percentage of income. In those cases, the time may extend out into the 10 years or beyond range. And one final thought to us, the LDS community, many of us here, an active LDS tithe-paying family with this much debt would likely need an initial salary of around $80,000 to make this work without feeling too pinched. With less debt, of course, less income would be required. I used to say $60,000, which is what Community came up with, and Don Livingstone, who was, and I started giving this to groups of people here, Don, who was the head of the entrepreneurship department, reworked some figures and said, when we were talking to the LDS community, you were paying, let's say 10% of their income to tithing, it wouldn't be quite as clean. And so we worked that back to in this case, $80,000. Okay. Any thoughts about that? Anybody have any questions or considerations? We have a few back there. Go ahead. Be nice and loud.
I was wondering, with the mortgage, it says at $100,000, and now you can't find a house.
Well, you can now. You couldn't a year ago, but I know of a few. You're right, and that's the thing that tips this a little bit, in my feeling, is if you work the numbers out, it tips it a little bit closer to finishing off sooner rather than later. So, for instance, it would be more normal to have a $200,000 mortgage payment. Now, I'm assuming that many of you will now at least have woken up to the reality that you don't want to buy a home unless you have a fairly healthy portion down for a lot of reasons. So the mortgage is the amount left, not the amount that the house cost initially. But if it's a $250,000 house and you were able to pay $50,000 down, that's just $200,000 left, which would take longer, obviously, in this case. But you're right. If we assumed a higher debt, it would take longer to get this done. It would be closer to the 7-year or 8-year range. And you can work it out, figure it out yourself, use some mathematical principles, and you'll find, again, that unless you're crazy with money, and by the way, it's easy to be crazy thanks to our plastic institution, our society today. I mean, it's possible to have 10 times leverage or debt of your yearly income. It's getting harder now because they're tightening credit, but it certainly was possible a couple years ago. I saw it, and people had it. So for instance, if you were making $100,000 a year, it was possible to ratchet up and have $1 million of debt. And it's sad. I mean, people are, dying doing that, but it looks good, on the outside. You look like a big shot, and I think people that actually get to that level, that must be the main reason they're doing that. But it's totally normal to be 3 or 4 times beyond, which makes it really, really hard to do the kinds of things we're talking about here, to be 3 or 4 times beyond your salary into debt. A lot of that usually is your home. And as I look at people that are really free, on almost every case, are living in homes that are well under what they could afford, or well under what the real estate agent will tell you can afford. That would be huge, in my estimation. If I could tell you anything about how to handle money properly, it would be to find a home well under what you could afford and get it done very quickly, if you could. Let's go back really quickly to the tale of two families on the other side again. Now, this is the other side of the story. They got debt-free very quickly. Fantastic. Now, look at this. Family A, following the counsel of the Lord, remaining moderate and enjoying the togetherness and simplicity of the last 5.5 years, instead of indulging themselves on the $2,800 now coming to them. That was the amount of debt they were paying. They got cleared up completely. So now they have this basic amount of money coming to them. Instead of giving that to their invisible creditors, decides to save and invest the amount wisely each month. They do that for the next 24.5 years. Now, I'm not saying this is completely It can be done. Although, on the income side, he's certainly ratcheting up his income likely over the years as well. So it would be possible, likely, to actually save and invest that fairly consistently. There's always things that come up. So, but it could come up in the other way too. So it could average out to about $2,800 a month. During those years, their take-home pay continued to increase beyond their simple needs, and the amount was more than enough to satisfy their simple, highly satisfying lifestyle. That magic place where everything they need, plus a little bit more, is enough. 30 years following that life-changing general conference, Family B might be able to pay off their home mortgage, which will reduce some of the financial stress. I doubt it, because they've likely moved up every 7 years, gone back to the amortization chart at the beginning, and never come close to paying off the home. They still have huge, massive debt or nowhere. That would be the norm. It's possible they could be done, but I just give them the possibility they could be. They've been struggling to make ends meet their entire married lives, living on credit, forcing income and expenses to wrap tightly around each other, never giving them the opportunity to purchase assets designed to go up and pay them, only feeling the crunch of hefty debt payments for depreciating assets that in time become worthless, which is sort of the American way. They still have heavy debt payments on cars and credit cards with no end to the financial pain in sight, and retirement right around the corner. The paradox is that Family B, at least on the exterior, would appear to have it all. They'd probably be living in a lot nicer home and driving really nice cars the whole time, and living, if you will, high on the hog. So looking on the outside, it probably appears, at least paradoxically, that they're great. Looking at their balance sheets and income statements, though, and the smoke coming from the bottom, it hasn't been that way. And usually that is the case. I'm not saying that's with everybody that lives high on the hill. I'm just guessing about 90% of them. Because about 10 have the cash and have plenty of cash. And so, again, I would point that unless they get out beyond themselves, they're not still living really joyfully. Family A has been completely debt-free for 24 and a half years and has applied their freed-up money, $2,794.73, into investments averaging 10% annual yield. That's just a guess. That's probably a little high. And on the heels of a 37% downer this last year, it probably seems impossible now. But trust me, historically speaking, we'll be back into a 10% or 11 or 12 on average, at least in the stock market. Owns everything in their lives, plus has an additional $3,511,733.84. This calculation is based on the future value of monthly deposits with 10% interest, not compounded continuously, but in this case monthly over a 24-and-a-half-year period. That amount of money at work could, for example, generate something like $70,000 a year in cash at a risk-free interest rate, possibly all the money this family would need in a simplified, debt-free lifestyle, while continuing to grow the endowment or nest egg, an average of maybe $300,000 a year in appreciating non-taxable gains from such assets as stocks and real estate holdings. Cash versus paper gains can be altered with changes on how dollars are sent off to work. That becomes part of maybe what you do for a living is to become the master of that and where to put that. Now, as I say in the bottom, here miraculously, we'll close here, are the two great gifts that so desperately keep us in chains. The gifts of time and money, in my feeling anyway, given by living the counsel of a loving God through His prophets for the express purpose of doing whatever we're inspired to do to help Him bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of our fellow brothers and sisters without any strings attached. I would just conclude by saying I'm still not sure the answer. Does the Lord want His children to have money? I can tell you this. I think He wants His children who follow Him to have resources for the express purpose of blessing everybody they can. I can give you that, and I can see and I can point to it, because if you live these 4 laws, scenarios like I've just pointed out happen. And if you don't, it won't on any income level. And so I think there's certainly a connection there. I didn't get to the steps to financial peace. We'll start with that next time. Have a wonderful... Wait, one more question? That's another story for one of the future weeks, which will have you coming back. Good. Thank you.